Don't move. The words barely left her lips before the bottle hit Bram's shoulder and shattered. The fog hadn't lifted off Caldera Lake yet, and the morning held that particular stillness that only exists before 7 a.m. in late October. For 29-year-old Captain Reagan Voss, that stillness used to mean something different. It used to mean the 10-minute window before a hallow jump when nobody talked and everybody checked their gear twice. Now it just meant the dock was empty and Bram could run without his leash. Bram moved at her left heel the way he always did, shoulders rolling, nose working the cold air. A passerby would have called him a German shepherd and left it there. They wouldn't have noticed the way his ears tracked sound independently of each other, or the puckered scar along his ribs where a piece of a 2018 IED blast in Helmand had carved a permanent groove into his fur. He'd been pulled out of 2 burning vehicles in his career. He'd lost his original handler. Now he had Reagan, and Reagan had him, and that was supposed to be the whole arrangement. 2 retirees keeping each other company on a lake nobody else bothered to visit. Officially, Reagan worked behavioral consulting for a private kennel 2 towns over, training rescue dogs for families who didn't ask too many questions about her resume. Unofficially, the DoD personnel file on her, the one most people would never get clearance to see, listed her as a former combat tracking and close quarters instructor for a Naval Special Warfare unit, the kind of operator who taught Tier 1 operators what to do when the rifle jammed and the only weapon left was their own hands. She didn't talk about it, she barely thought about it most days. She came to Caldera Lake at dawn because the silence reset something in her chest that nothing else could touch. That morning, the silence broke early. There were 3 of them on the dock when she rounded the boathouse, leaning on the rail like they owned the lake, like they owned the whole county. The one in the middle had a sleeve of crude tattoos crawling up from his wrist and a way of standing that told you he was used to people stepping aside. That was Wade Tully, local. Everyone in 3 towns knew his name, mostly from the county court docket. Beside him stood his cousin Cole, lean and twitchy, picking at something under his fingernail. The third, a barrel-chested man named Hutch, had an aluminum bat resting against his shoulder like a baseball player waiting his turn. Reagan didn't change her pace. She just felt her weight settle lower, her shoulders drop half an inch, the old instinct waking up before her conscious mind caught up to it. Bram noticed the men a full 2 seconds before she did. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He just went still, every muscle locked, golden eyes fixed on Wade like he was reading a target package. "Morning," Reagan said, voice even. "Dock's a little crowded. Mind making some room?" Wade spat over the rail into the water. His eyes crawled over her, then dropped to the dog, and something ugly flickered across his face. "This is private access," he said. "Belongs to my uncle. You're trespassing. This dock's public. Has been since the county put it in." She kept her tone flat, almost bored. 15 feet of distance between them, close enough to be polite, far enough to react. Don't matter what the county says. Wade pushed off the railing, taking 2 slow steps forward. Cole and Hutch straightened like dogs catching a scent. "Out here, what matters is what I say. And right now I'm saying you and your mutt are gonna turn around." She'd negotiated with militia commanders in Kandahar who had more menace and less imagination. This was tedious more than frightening, the kind of confrontation that made her tired in a way combat never had. "I don't want trouble," she said. "We'll walk the other way. You'll never see us again." Hutch chuckled, tapping the bat against his palm. "She don't want trouble, Wade. Ain't that precious?" "Real precious," Wade said, grinning now, taking another step. He looked at Bram, and something predatory crept into his expression. "That's a nice-looking dog you got there. Good bone structure. Bet some fellas down in Tillman County would pay real money for an animal like that. You leave him here, hand over whatever's in your jacket, and maybe I let you walk back to your car with your teeth still in your head." The temperature in Reagan's chest dropped about 20 degrees. Up until that sentence, this had been an irritation, a delay in her morning. The moment Wade mentioned taking Bram, it became something else entirely. "I'm going to say this once," Reagan said, and every trace of warmth left her voice. "Get back in whatever truck you drove here in and leave." Cole burst out laughing, a high, ugly sound. "Or what? You gonna sick the dog on us? I got a knife in my boot that'll gut him before he gets a tooth near me." Bram's ears flattened. He looked up at Reagan, waiting on a single syllable that would let him finish this in under 3 seconds. She held it back. He'd already bled for his country once. She wasn't going to let him bleed for 3 idiots on a lake dock in Oregon. "Stay," she murmured. Bram sat, trembling with restrained intent, every fiber of him coiled. Reagan stepped forward, putting her own body between the dog and the 3 men. "Last chance," she said quietly. Something in Wade's pride snapped at being talked down to by a woman half his size. "Get the dog," he barked at Hutch. "She gets in your way, put her on the ground." Hutch didn't hesitate. He swung the bat in a wide arc meant to take out her ribs and clear a path. He never saw what happened next. Reagan stepped inside the swing instead of away from it. The first rule of disarming a blunt weapon is closing the distance, not creating it. Her left arm trapped his forearms while her right hand drove forward, the heel of her palm catching him square in the throat. The bat clattered onto the dock boards. Before he'd even processed the pain, she'd hooked his leg out from under him and dropped him onto the wood with a crack that echoed off the water. He lay there gasping, hands at his throat, completely out of the fight in under 2 seconds. Wade and Cole froze. The smugness drained out of both their faces, replaced by something closer to disbelief. Cole recovered first, yanking a folding knife from his pocket. The blade snapped open with a metallic click. Bram lunged forward half a step, snarling, but held his ground at her command. Cole slashed wildly at her face. Reagan leaned back, let the blade whisper past her cheek, then surged in, not for the knife hand, the rookie mistake, but redirecting his forearm wide while she stepped to the outside of his leg. Her fist found his ribs with a crack that silenced the morning birds. He folded forward, and her knee met his face on the way down. He hit the dock unconscious before his knife did. Wade stood alone now, color gone from his face, looking between his 2 friends like he was trying to do math that didn't add up. "You," he stammered, backing into the railing, hand drifting toward his waistband. Reagan caught the motion instantly, a cheap revolver tucked under his jacket. "Pull that," she said, voice dropping into something almost gentle and far more frightening for it. "And I won't just break your wrist. I'll end the conversation permanently." His hand wavered. Pride and panic fought it out behind his eyes, and panic lost. He pulled the gun free. "Bram!" Reagan's voice cracked across the dock. "Fass!" 70 pounds of trained muscle crossed 15 feet of dock in under a second and a half. Bram hit Wade square in the chest, jaws closing on his forearm with bone-deep pressure. The revolver clattered into the lake. Wade went down screaming. Bram held the bite, controlled, no thrashing, just absolute pressure and a low growl that vibrated through the dock planks. Reagan walked over, picked up nothing. The gun was already in 8 feet of lake water, and crouched beside the sobbing man. "I gave you a warning," she said. Please call him off." She checked her watch instead of answering right away. "People like you don't learn from words. You learn from consequences." She straightened, pulled flex cuffs from her jacket pocket. She always carried them, an old habit nobody ever managed to talk her out of, and was halfway through securing Wade's wrists when something on the dock caught her eye. Beneath a tarp draped over a stack of crates near the boathouse, half hidden behind a coil of rope, sat a row of olive-drab cases. Federal stenciling, property of U.S. Dept of Defense. Her stomach dropped through the dock boards. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. Bram, aus. Out. The dog released his grip, but stood guard over Wade. Growl still rumbling low. Reagan grabbed Wade by the collar and hauled him upright onto his knees. No time for niceties. "You don't have the connections to steal from a federal armory," she said. "You're a runner. Who hired you?" "I don't know his real name," Wade gasped. eyes wide with terror now that something bigger than his own pride had entered the conversation. "Everyone just calls him the quartermaster. We're supposed to hand off the cases to his security team." "Right here. This morning." "When?" 7:30. 2 trucks. Maybe 6, 7 guys. "They're armed, lady, please." Reagan checked her tactical watch. 7:12. She dragged all 3 men off the dock and into the brush along the shoreline, out of immediate sight. A lone woman standing over 3 unconscious men when an armed convoy rolled up would not survive the encounter. She needed cover, height, and time. Bram. Here. The dog fell into a perfect heel, and together they retreated up a wooded slope overlooking the boat ramp, settling behind a fallen cedar with a clear line down to the dock. "Plats," she whispered. "Down." Bram flattened, vanishing into the underbrush, a shadow with eyes. At 7:24, the silence broke. 2 black Suburbans rolled down the gravel access road, suspension groaning under armored weight. They stopped 20 yards from the abandoned dock. 6 men stepped out in tactical gear, fanning into a defensive perimeter with the practiced efficiency that told Reagan immediately these were not local criminals. The man who appeared to be in charge, tall, grey-bearded, carrying himself like prior force recon, scanned the scene. The blood on the dock boards, the missing cargo, the absence of his contact. He raised a closed fist. The other 5 fell silent and brought their rifles up. "We have a compromised site," he said into a radio mic. "Spread out. Find whoever did this. Weapons free." Reagan's pulse didn't spike. It settled the way it always had before a mission, into something cold and procedural. She had a revolver she'd taken off Wade earlier, 5 rounds, a fixed blade knife, and a dog. 6 men had body armor and suppressed rifles. She'd been outnumbered worse in places with worse names than Caldera Lake. "Time to go to work," she whispered to Bram, running a hand down the ridge of scar tissue along his spine. 2 of the mercenaries broke off to sweep the tree line, moving with trained precision, but relying too heavily on optics, making too much noise in the dry leaves underfoot. Reagan slid down the back slope of the hill, using the trunk of a Douglas fir to mask her approach, and positioned herself behind a rotted stump 10 feet from their path. She picked up a rock and threw it 20 yards into the brush. Both men spun toward the sound, exactly the lapse she needed. She closed the gap on the nearest one before he could turn back, clamping a hand over his mouth and driving her knife into the nerve cluster beneath his arm. He dropped without a sound, his nervous system shutting down before he hit the ground. The second man turned, confused that his partner had gone silent and never finished the motion. Bram came off the slope without a bark, without a growl, 70 pounds of silent intent. He struck the man's center mass, jaws locking onto his gun wrist with a crunch that ended the fight before it started. Reagan finished it with a single strike to the jaw. 2 down, no sound carried back to the dock. The grey-bearded leader checked his watch, then his radio. "Status report. Static. Respond." "Nothing. We've got a hostile in the trees," he barked to his remaining 3 men. "Tighten up on the cargo." They backed against the Suburbans, rifles sweeping the tree line. "Whoever's out there, we are heavily armed. Show yourself with your hands up." Reagan stepped out of the shadows into the grey morning light, hands at her sides, not raised. "It's a woman," the leader muttered, baffled. "Just one. Where's the rest of her team?" "There isn't one," Reagan said, voice carrying flat and clear across the gravel. "But I have an offer. Drop your weapons, get on the ground, and you walk away from this alive." He laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You're out of your mind. Light her up." The 3 men raised their rifles in unison, and a high-pitched whine cut through the morning air. A black Bearcat armored vehicle crashed through the tree line at the bottom of the access road, lights flashing, 4 unmarked SUVs trailing behind it. When Reagan had dialed her satellite phone an hour earlier, it hadn't been to the county sheriff. The signal had gone straight to a joint task force cell out of Portland, along with the serial numbers stenciled on the federal cases. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The order boomed over a megaphone as a dozen agents in tactical gear poured down the slope, rifles trained on the 3 remaining mercenaries. The leader stared at the wall of agents, then back at the lone woman standing in the gravel with her hands still at her sides, and something behind his eyes finally clicked into place. She hadn't been a victim, she'd been the trap, and he'd walked his whole crew straight into it. He lowered his rifle and dropped to his knees. Reagan watched the agents secure the scene, drag Wade and his cousins out of the brush, and begin photographing the federal cases. She whistled once, low, and Bram emerged from the tree line, trotting to her side and sitting at her heel like nothing at all had happened that morning. A tactical commander approached, glancing between the cuffed men, the unconscious mercenaries, and the woman who appeared to have done this entirely alone. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "did you do all of this?" Reagan reached into her jacket and produced a small leather credential case. The commander opened it, read the gold lettering inside, and went very quiet. "Just walking my dog, Commander," she said, clipping a leash onto Bram's collar. "The lake should be safe again." She turned and walked back into the fog rising off Caldera Lake, the dog at her heel, both of them disappearing into the mist like they'd never been there at all.